Hey, you. Yeah, you there. Working on the miniature. You're doing an awesome job. Oh, don't worry about that. We'll help you with that. The miniature building community is literally the best group on the internet to help you develop your skills. I'm going to give you some tips right now on some theory that's really going to help you with your miniature builds and your paint jobs. Miniature and model painting is a rewarding and fun hobby. You can be building for wargames, displays, dioramas, or any number of reasons, all of which are a great gateway to an amazing and challenging art form. But, just like any art, the subject is vast, and there are pitfalls for both the beginner and advanced painter alike, especially if you do not get a start with the correct theory. Notice I said theory, not technique. The history of our hobby is full of abandoned projects and artists that give up for want of a correct path to improvement. And this isn't their fault. In fact, it's actually our fault, the community of advanced painters that they follow. With the best of intentions to share our skills, the YouTubers and teachers of the Way of the Brush focus on the day-to-day techniques and things like paint colors. This is good, but it's done at the expense of front-loading some of the hard-learned, if somewhat less tangible lessons that we've taken years to learn. These are the very same lessons that, if learned first, will save a lot of time and effort to help anyone improve. Now, these lessons are all about theory, not the glamour of winning a crystal brush or golden demon award, but they are the foundation to success in the art, and they provide an interesting study in exactly how our hobby works. So, if you're just starting out, or are more advanced, looking at some of the basic model painting theory should help empower you to up your game. Let's take a look now at what I feel are some of the key elements to becoming a better painter. Here is an orc. This orc is from back before orcs were green. He's a very special orc, too, because he's the oldest model in my collection. I painted him when I was about 12 years old. Now here is a Napoleonic French officer. He's not that special. I painted him to a moderate standard last week. When you put the two side by side, there should be a pretty striking difference. That being more than 30 years of experience, and most importantly, practice. The difference in time is the record of my knowledge as a painter. This journey is specific to me and is indivisible from my personal development. Obviously, that's important. The process of learning is, in that sense, more important than the result. Now, I hang out on various Facebook groups where beginning painters are, and I see a lot of comments like this. And my favorite? What we see here is a new artist who wants a great outcome, but they're discounting that they need to take the journey first. And I don't blame them. I would love to be an expert on the first try, but you can't. It's just not possible. This leads us to the proper mindset for learning an art. It's not about getting to the final expert result. It's about refining and growing your skill at your own pace. measuring yourself. To do this, you need to weigh your abilities in terms of improvement from one project to the next. This way, you can celebrate your process and enjoy the road. Oh, yeah, and about your model looking better unpainted, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. Any model, no matter its origin, is made for the purposes of first, developing your art, and second, expressing yourself. If you're committed to developing your skills, and who isn't, then it's literally impossible not to learn from your experience. And because you're making a vision in your head into a real world object, then you are certainly expressing yourself. Both of these are great things, more or less independent of how you feel about the final result. As a person that teaches the joys of building a miniature, any work you do is an awesome step forward as far as I'm concerned. A model is just that, a model. It's a representation of reality, not, obviously, the real thing. This BMP is not the same as the real thing, even though it's a representation of it. The real thing is much bigger, and therefore gathers more light in some spots, which in turn creates darker shadows in others. This phenomena is interpreted by our brains to register it as an object of the correct scale. Let's look at another example from one of my other videos. Here is a Sherman Firefly from Base Borden. It's a big, heavy tank, and it's painted green. Now here is another model of exactly the same tank, rendered in 1/100 scale. Imagine for a moment that we paint the model exactly as the real thing. It just wouldn't look right. What's missing is contrast, the process of building a difference between points gathering more light from those receiving less light. Here is my orc again. As a beginner, I decided that his skin should be light brown, so I painted him light brown. This resulted in him looking like a light brown miniature, not an orc. What I needed to do was exaggerate the dark areas and the brighter areas in order to make him look like he was 5 to 6 feet tall, and therefore he would register in your brain as a big orc, not a little figurine. Of course, at the time, I didn't know this. To create contrast, you need to plan ahead for your color scheme to identify which colors to use to make areas darker, or shaded, and which to make brighter, highlighted. There are lots of ways to do this, and I suggest you watch my videos to learn more. But what is important here is that you understand the theory behind it. I would like to provide one more example, though, before we leave this subject. Here is a French Napoleonic model in a beige greatcoat. He's in 28mm scale. Now here is a Russian commissar from World War II in his beige uniform. Notice that they're essentially the same color scheme, but they're obviously different sizes. When painting these models, you have to compensate for this. The smaller the scale, the more extreme the range and contrast needs to be. The brighter colors on the 15mm models are just brighter, and the darker areas are darker. This wider variation, of course, is for the same reason as we discussed previously. It's to trick your brain into registering an appropriate size for what the model represents. Just remember this rule: the smaller you get, the more exaggerated the contrast becomes. The human brain, and notice I'm assuming here my viewers are all human, is an amazing thing. It's designed to immediately recognize certain patterns to establish an understanding of the world around us. This, of course, is why we need to create contrast, but it has another effect we need to take into account for the hobby. I call this frame of reference. Because of this quality of our brains, we need to make sure that some pattern exists in the model that we will identify with. This will help reinforce the recognition of the subject and establish its scale. Do you know what this is? Probably not. It looks like a green square, and I imagine it's not going to hold your interest for very long. However, when we zoom out, we see that it's a rocket. Now, our brain doesn't attach much meaning to a green square, but now we know it's actually the wing. When we recognize the rocket, it gets more compelling, making it a better subject. We know from our experience that this thing, if it was the real-world equivalent, can fly, plays an important role in history, makes loud noises, and might even explode. That makes the rocket a whole lot more interesting. It's a good subject now when we can focus on the parts that our brains recognize. Fortunately, most models are representations of people, and we're really good at recognizing this, specifically because a person, or something similar to a person, has a structure recognizable as a face. Our brains are predisposed to recognizing faces, so a model with a face becomes a person, and that's interesting to our brains. People do things. We walk, we talk, we have emotions, and so we can relate to them. As model painters, it's important that we remember to add these recognizable features to put the model in context and give it meaning we can understand. This is sometimes referred to as visual interest, and it makes us compelled to look at the model and learn more about it. Here is a Napoleonic soldier. He has a face, so we know he's supposed to be a person. He has a dour expression, and this suggests he might be about to use his musket. I guess he's in a war. This makes him an interesting subject. Now, here is basically the same model, except for some reason his face is blue. Maybe he's going to a sporting event after the battle, and blue is his team's color. Or maybe he self-identifies as a Smurf. We'll likely never know. But whatever the reason, it looks wrong. Our brains don't see a person. The model reverts from being a representation of a person, and it just becomes an object now. A strange one that I'll need to repaint. In practical terms, frames of reference should be considered at the outset of the model project to ensure that the viewer can identify with the subject and therefore relate to it. Don't leave it to chance. Often this means that immediately recognizable objects, and especially faces, need extra care and should always be treated as the main focus of the model. This means painting it to the highest standard. Though some of the secondary details can be given just as much detail, make sure the part creating the frame of reference is always the central focus. Lastly, frames of reference are important for terrain projects. Frequently, landforms don't have people in them, so when we look at it, say a model of a hill or some other similar structure, we have no idea how big it's supposed to be. This can compromise the ability of the viewer to develop interest in the subject. This fortunately is easily fixed by adding a recognizable object that we will know the approximate size of. Is this brick wall 4 feet tall? 10 feet tall? Could you climb it? What happens if my cat falls off of it? We don't know. Oh, hold on. We add a wagon wheel, and now we know the scale. Problem solved. And there you have it. 3 important pieces of theory that you can incorporate into your miniature builds. Make sure you try some of these out with your next project, and let us know in the comments how it improves your skills. That's it for this episode. I hope you liked watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. Please remember that Miniature Landscape Hobbies is supported entirely by its viewers. If you would like to assist with the production, please consider joining me on Patreon. I have many levels for my Patreons to subscribe to. You can get access to the STL files I use, and even receive painting lessons or terrain. If Patreon's not your thing, then how about you head over to my Etsy store? Any purchases you might make help support the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Remember to subscribe, and as always, remember to keep building life in miniature.